The Marvelous Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 21. The Tin Woodman Plucks a Rose. The army of Glinda the Good looked very grand and imposing when it assembled at daybreak before the palace gates. The uniforms of the girl soldiers were pretty and of gay colors, and their silver-tipped spears were bright and glistening, the long shafts being inlaid with mother of pearl. All the officers wore sharp, gleaming swords and shields edged with peacock feathers, and it really seemed that no foe could by any possibility defeat such a brilliant army. The sorceress rode in a beautiful palanquin, which was like the body of a coach, having doors and windows with silken curtains, but instead of wheels which a coach has, the palanquin rested upon two long horizontal bars, which were borne upon the shoulders of 12 servants. The Scarecrow and his comrades decided to ride in the Gump in order to keep up with the swift march of the army. As soon as Glinda had started and her soldiers had marched away to the inspiring strains of music played by the royal band, our friends climbed into the sofas and followed. The Gump flew along slowly at a point directly over the palanquin in which rode the sorceress. "Be careful," said the Tin Woodman to the Scarecrow, who was leaning far over the side to look at the army below. "You might fall." "It wouldn't matter," remarked the educated Wogglebug. "He can't get broken so long as he is stuffed with money." "Didn't I ask you?" began Tip in a reproachful voice. "You did," said the Wogglebug promptly, "and I beg your pardon. I will really try to restrain myself." "You'd better," declared the boy. "That is, if you wish to travel in our company." "Ah, I couldn't bear to part with you now," murmured the insect. Feelingly so, Tip let the subject drop. The army moved steadily on, but night had fallen before they came to the walls of the Emerald City. By the dim light of the new moon, however, Glinda's forces silently surrounded the city and pitched their tents of scarlet silk upon the green sward. The tent of the sorceress was larger than the others and was composed of pure white silk, with scarlet banners flying above it. A tent was also pitched for the Scarecrow's party, and when these preparations had been made, with military precision and quickness, the army retired to rest. Great was the amazement of Queen Ginger next morning when her soldiers came running to inform her of the vast army surrounding them. She at once climbed to a high tower of the royal palace and saw banners waving in every direction and the great white tent of Glinda standing directly before the gates. "We are surely lost," cried Ginger in despair, "for how can our knitting needles avail against the long spears and terrible swords of our foes?" "The best thing we can do," said one of the girls, "is to surrender as quickly as possible before we get hurt." "Not so," returned Ginger more bravely. "The enemy is still outside the walls, so we must try to gain time by engaging them in parley. Go you with a flag of truce to Glinda and ask her why she has dared to invade my dominions and what are her demands." So the girl passed through the gates bearing a white flag to show she was on a mission of peace and came to Glinda's tent. "Tell your queen," said the sorceress to the girl, "that she must deliver up me, old Mombi, to be my prisoner. If this is done, I will not molest her farther." Now, when this message was delivered to the queen, it filled her with dismay, for Mombi was her chief counselor, and Ginger was terribly afraid of the old hag. But she sent for Mombi and told her what Glinda had said. "I see trouble ahead for all of us," muttered the old witch after glancing into a magic mirror she carried in her pocket. "But we may even yet escape by deceiving this sorceress, clever as she thinks herself." "Don't you think it will be safer for me to deliver you into her hands?" asked Ginger nervously. If you do, it will cost you the throne of the Emerald City, answered the witch positively. But if you will let me have my own way, I can save us both very easily. Then do as you please, replied Ginger, for it is so aristocratic to be a queen that I do not wish to be obliged to return home again to make beds and wash dishes for my mother. So Mombi called Jellia Jam to her and performed a certain magical rite with which she was familiar. As a result of the enchantment, Jellia took on the form and features of Mombi, while the old witch grew to resemble the girl so closely that it seemed impossible anyone could guess the deception. Now, said old Mombi to the queen, let your soldiers deliver up this girl to Glinda. She will think she has the real Mombi in her power, and so will return immediately to her own country in the south. Therefore, Jellia, hobbling along like an aged woman, was led from the city gates and taken before Glinda. Here is the person you demand, said one of the guards, and our queen now begs you will go away as you promised and leave us in peace. That I will surely do, replied Glinda, much pleased, if this is really the person she seems to be. It is certainly old Mombi, said the guard, who believed she was speaking the truth, and then Ginger's soldiers returned within the city's gates. The sorceress quickly summoned the Scarecrow and his friends to her tent and began to question the supposed Mombi about the lost girl, Ozma. But Jellia knew nothing at all of this affair, and presently she grew so nervous under the questioning that she gave way and began to weep, to Glinda's great astonishment. Here is some foolish trickery, said the sorceress, her eyes flashing with anger. This is not Mombi at all, but some other person who has been made to resemble her. Tell me, she demanded, turning to the trembling girl, what is your name? This Jellia dared not tell, having been threatened with death by the witch if she confessed the fraud. But Glinda, sweet and fair though she was, understood magic better than any other person in the land of Oz. So, by uttering a few potent words and making a peculiar gesture, she quickly transformed the girl into her proper shape, while at the same time old Mombi, far away in Ginger's palace, suddenly resembled her own crooked form and evil features. "Why, it's Jellia Jam!" cried the Scarecrow, recognizing in the girl one of his old friends. "It's our interpreter," said the Pumpkinhead, smiling pleasantly. Then Jellia was forced to tell of the trick Mombi had played, and she also begged Glinda's protection, which the sorceress readily granted. But Glinda was now really angry, and sent word to Ginger that the fraud was discovered, and she must deliver up the real Mombi or suffer terrible consequences. Ginger was prepared for this message, for the witch well understood when her natural form was thrust upon her that Glinda had discovered her trickery. But the wicked old creature had already thought up a new deception and had made Ginger promise to carry it out. So the queen said to Glinda's messenger, "Tell your mistress that I cannot find Mombi anywhere, but that Glinda is welcome to enter the city and search herself for the old woman. She may also bring her friends with her if she likes, but if she does not find Mombi by sundown, the sorceress must promise to go away peaceably and bother us no more." Glinda agreed to these terms, well knowing that Mombi was somewhere within the city walls, so Ginger caused the gates to be thrown open, and Glinda marched in at the head of a company of soldiers, followed by the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, while Jack Pumpkinhead rode astride the Sawhorse, and the educated, highly magnified Wogglebug sauntered behind in a dignified manner. Tip walked by the side of the sorceress, for Glinda had conceived a great liking for the boy. Of course, old Mombi had no intention of being found by Glinda, So, while her enemies were marching up the street, the witch transformed herself into a red rose growing upon a bush in the garden of the palace. It was a clever idea and a trick Glinda did not suspect. So several precious hours were spent in a vain search for Mombi. As sundown approached, the sorceress realized she had been defeated by the superior cunning of the aged witch. So she gave the command to her people to march out of the city and back to their tents. The Scarecrow and his comrades happened to be searching in the garden of the palace just then, and they turned with disappointment to obey Glinda's command. But before they left the garden, the Tin Woodman, who was fond of flowers, chanced to espy a big red rose growing upon a bush. So he plucked the flower and fastened it securely to the tin buttonhole of his tin bosom. As he did this, he fancied he heard a low moan proceed from the rose, but he paid no attention to the sound, and Mombi was thus carried out of the city and into Glinda's camp without anyone having a suspicion that they had succeeded in their quest. Chapter 22 The Transformation of Old Mombi. The witch was at first frightened at finding herself captured by the enemy, but soon she decided that she was exactly as safe in the Tin Woodman's buttonhole as growing upon the bush, for no one knew the Rose and Mombi to be one, and now that she was without the gates of the city, her chances of escaping altogether from Glinda were much improved. But there's no hurry, thought Mombi. I will wait a while and enjoy the humiliation of this sorceress when she finds I have outwitted her. So throughout the night the rose lay quietly on the woodman's bosom, and in the morning, when Glinda summoned her friends to a consultation, Nick Chopper carried his pretty flower with him to the white silk tent. For some reason, said Glinda, we have failed to find this cunning old Mombi, so I fear our expedition will prove a failure, and for that I'm sorry, because without our assistance little Ozma will never be rescued and restored to her rightful position as Queen of the Emerald City. Don't let us give up so easily, said the Pumpkinhead. Let us do something else. Something else must really be done, replied Glinda with a smile. Yet I can't understand how I have been defeated so easily by an old witch who knows far less magic than I do myself. While we're on the ground, I believe it would be wise for us to conquer the Emerald City for Princess Ozma and find the girl afterward, said the Scarecrow. And while the girl remains hidden, I will gladly rule in her place, for I understand the business of ruling much better than Ginger does. But I have promised not to molest Ginger, objected Glinda. Suppose you all return with me to my kingdom, or empire rather, said the Tin Woodman politely, including the entire party in a royal wave of his arm. It will give me great pleasure to entertain you in my castle, where there is room enough to spare, and if any of you wish to be nickel-plated, my valet will do it all. Will do it free of all expense. Oh my. While the woodman was speaking, Glinda's eyes had been noting the rose in his buttonhole, and now she imagined she was the big red leaves of the flower tremble slightly. This quickly aroused her suspicions, and in a moment more, the sorceress had decided that the seeing rose was nothing else than a transformation of old Mombi, and at the same instant, Mombi knew she was discovered and must quickly plan an escape. And as transformations were easy to her, she immediately took the form of a shadow and glided along the wall of the tent toward the entrance, thinking thus to disappear. But Glinda had not only equal cunning, but far more experience than the witch. So the sorceress reached the opening of the tent before the shadow and with a wave of her hand closed the entrance so securely that Mombi could not find a crack big enough to creep through. The Scarecrow and his friends were greatly surprised at Glinda's actions, for none of them had noted the shadow. But the sorceress said to them, "Remain perfectly quiet, all of you, for the old witch is even now with us in this tent, and I hope to capture her." These words so alarmed Mombi that she quickly transformed herself from a shadow to a black ant, in which shape she crawled along the ground seeking a crack or crevice in which to hide her tiny body. Fortunately, the ground where the tent had been pitched, being just before the city gates, was hard and smooth, and while the ant still crawled about, Glinda discovered it and ran quickly forward to effect its capture. But just as her hand was descending, the witch, now fairly frantic with fear, made her last transformation, and in the form of a huge griffin, sprang through the wall of the tent, tearing the silk asunder in her rush, and in a moment had darted away with the speed of a whirlwind. Glinda did not hesitate to follow. She sprang upon the back of the Sawhorse and cried, "Now you shall prove that you have a right to be alive. Run, run, run!" The Sawhorse ran. Like a flash he followed the Griffin, his wooden legs moving so fast that they twinkled like the rays of a star. Before our friends could recover from their surprise, both the Griffin and the Sawhorse had dashed out of sight. "Come, let us follow!" cried the Scarecrow. They ran to the place where the Gump was lying and quickly tumbled aboard. "Fly!" commanded Tip eagerly. "Where to?" asked the Gump in its calm voice. "I don't know," returned Tip, who was very nervous at the delay. "But if you will mount into the air, I think we can discover which way Glinda has gone." "Very well," returned the Gump quietly, and it spread its great wings and mounted high into the air. Far away across the meadows, they could now see two tiny specks speeding one after the other, and they knew these specks must be the Griffin and the Sawhorse. So Tip called the Gump's attention to them and bade the creature try to overtake the witch and the sorceress. But swift as was the Gump's flight, the pursued and pursuer moved more swiftly yet, and within a few moments were blotted out against the dim horizon. "Let us continue to follow them, nevertheless," said the Scarecrow, "for the land of Oz is of small extent, and sooner or later they must both come to a halt." Old Mombi had thought herself very wise to choose the form of a griffin, for its legs were exceedingly fleet, and its strength more enduring than that of other animals. But she had not reckoned on the untiring energy of the Sawhorse, whose wooden limbs could run for days without slacking their speed. Therefore, after an hour's hard running, the Griffin's breath began to fail, and its panting and gasped painfully and moved more slowly than before. Then it reached the end of the desert and began racing across the deep sands. But its tired feet sank far into the sands, and in a few minutes the Griffin fell forward, completely exhausted, and lay still upon the desert waste. Glinda came up a moment later, riding the still vigorous Sawhorse, and having unwound a slender golden thread from her girdle, the sorceress threw it over the head of the panting and helpless Griffin, and so destroyed the magical power of Mombi's transformation. For the animal, with one fierce shudder, disappeared from view, while in its place was discovered the form of the old witch, glaring savagely at the serene and beautiful face of the sorceress.